Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. Today's deep dive is an English listening practice podcast, and our topic is Think Like an English Native Speaker. Now, if you've reached an advanced stage in your English learning journey, you've likely, conquered the hurdles of complex grammar, you've built up a vast vocabulary, maybe even mastered those tricky idioms. You can probably craft professional emails, no problem, engage in casual conversations pretty smoothly, maybe even ace those standardized tests. But have you ever felt that subtle, lingering gap, that kind of elusive feeling where true fluency, the kind native speakers just have, seems just slightly out of reach, almost like you're performing in English rather than just, being in English?
Oh, absolutely. That's a profoundly common experience for advanced learners, and it really hits on something crucial. The aspiration, you see, isn't merely to speak or write English effectively, although that's great. It's to genuinely think in English, where ideas just form directly in the language, humor lands perfectly without that mental pause, and those cultural references surface effortlessly, almost like they've always been part of your mental landscape. This isn't just about language proficiency. It truly represents the pinnacle of language mastery. It's a genuine cognitive transformation.
I understand exactly what you mean. It's that feeling of true integration, right? Where there's no mental friction, no translation lag. Okay, so let's unpack this. This deep dive is designed to be your comprehensive blueprint for bridging that very divide. We're drawing from insights in linguistics, cognitive psychology, and some really compelling real-world anecdotes to give you a powerful toolkit. So whether you're maybe a global executive aiming for seamless international communication, an aspiring author striving for that authentic voice, a traveler seeking truly genuine connections, or maybe you're simply passionate about linguistic immersion, prepare to rewire your brain and make English an intrinsic, effortless part of your cognition. Our mission today is really to transform your understanding of fluency from merely speaking well to thinking fluently, #tag1, the psychological architecture of native-like cognition. All right, so to genuinely get to that point of thinking like a native English speaker, we first need to understand the fundamental cognitive distinctions. What's different between a dedicated language learner and someone who grew up with English? It's not just about having more words or knowing grammar rules, is it? It's deeper than that. It's profoundly about how our brains actually process and, generate language at its core. What's happening differently up there?
That's a great question. What's truly fascinating here is how our brains actually build language. It's not a static collection of instructions you just memorize. It's much more like a dynamic, intricate neural network. And it's profoundly shaped by consistent exposure, by repetition, and critically, even by deep emotional connections. Native speakers, you see, process English holistically in an integrated way. They effectively bypass any intermediary step of translation. So imagine a complex thought forming in your mind. For a native speaker, that thought just immediately materializes in English. There's no pause, no internal conversion. And this allows for remarkably seamless, rapid idea generation. Now, for advanced learners, the crucial challenge involves dismantling what we sometimes call linguistic scaffolding.
Linguistic scaffolding, like the support structures you use when you're building something.
Exactly. It's that often unconscious reliance on your native language, your L1, as a kind of mental prop or crutch. The goal is to replace that scaffolding with direct, robust pathways operating exclusively in English. This is where the profound, deep-seated transformation truly begins. It's really about building a dedicated English operating system in your mind.
You mentioned that scaffolding and dismantling it. That brings to mind something we've probably all experienced. Linguistic interference. It sounds a bit like, an uninvited guest crashing your mental party, maybe causing a bit of a commotion in your thoughts. Can you give us a really tangible illustration of what that looks and feels like for someone learning English?
You've pretty much nailed the feeling. It's this invisible, yet often quite significant barrier. Linguistic interference happens when the ingrained patterns, the structures from your native language, subtly intrude upon your English thoughts. This can lead to hesitations, maybe phrasing things in a way that sounds a little unnatural, or even just a slight awkwardness in your mental expressions. A classic example, perhaps for a Spanish speaker, is mentally formulating, "I have 30 years," when they mean, "I'm 30 years old."
Ah, right, like a direct translation that just doesn't work in English.
Precisely. It's a direct translation of "Tengo 30 años," a perfectly normal Spanish construction. But it simply doesn't fit the natural English idiom. And it's not just a grammatical slip-up. It's a direct copy of a thought structure from their L1 filtering through. Cognitive linguists sometimes talk about this in terms of multi-competence, where you have multiple languages coexisting in the same mind, but sometimes they contend for dominance. The L1 often tries to take the lead.
Wow. So it's actually more insidious than just making a speaking error. It's like you're forming the thought incorrectly in your head first before you even say anything. That must be incredibly frustrating and probably really energy consuming too, right?
It absolutely can be.
So how do we even begin to overcome something so ingrained, this sort of automatic mental translation habit?
Well, to get past this, the core strategy really involves cultivating what's known as language mode switching. This idea comes from research on bilingualism, and it basically entails consciously entering an English-only mindset. Think of it like flipping a mental switch, creating an internal English-only zone where you deliberately try to disengage your native language.
Like putting up a do not disturb sign for your L1.
Kind of. And psychologically, this significantly reduces your cognitive load, that mental effort involved in constantly juggling between languages. You're no longer doing that mental translation dance. Studies have consistently shown that regularly practicing in these monolingual modes actually strengthens the brain's inhibitory control. It helps you suppress those L1 intrusions that can slow down your thinking and make it feel less spontaneous. It's about training your brain to stay comfortably in that English lane.
So it's like creating a mental English-only bubble. That sounds incredibly practical, almost like a mental workout to build new pathways.
Exactly. A superb way to start is by designating specific English zones within your daily life. Maybe your morning routine, while you're brewing coffee, getting dressed, that becomes a no L1 territory. Or perhaps your workout session, or even your daily commute could be strictly English in your head. Over time, this habituation, and this is deeply rooted in Hebbian learning theory, the idea that neurons that fire together wire together, fosters the creation of solid, dedicated English neural circuits. These become your default pathways, your brain's preferred route for thought in those situations. The more you use them, the stronger and faster they get.
But I imagine that's not always easy, is it? Well, what if you're really you're in your English zone and your native language still barges in? It's hard to just turn off decades of ingrained habits.
That's a very valid point and a very real challenge. It often leads to what some call the interference rebound effect. This is when mental fatigue or stress or just plain exhaustion can cause your L1 to creep back in more forcefully. It's like your brain's automatic default setting kicking back in. It's like trying to walk a tightrope in English when you're tired. Your brain, seeking the path of least resistance, just wants to drop back to the familiar ground of your native tongue.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the solution then? Just try harder.
Well, not necessarily harder, but perhaps smarter. The real insight here isn't just to redirect, but maybe to build mental resilience against that fatigue. When you notice those L1 intrusions, instead of seeing them as failures, maybe view them as subtle cues. Cues to recalibrate and gently strengthen your English pathways. You can use mindfulness techniques. Acknowledge the L1 thought, then gently, without judging yourself, redirect it back to English. It's a continuous, almost meditative practice of mental recalibration. It enhances your focus, much like meditation does. This consistent, gentle redirection over time trains your brain to inhibit those L1 patterns more effectively, even when you're tired.
This is really captivating stuff. You mentioned earlier that native speakers don't just use words, they feel them, often on a quite profound, visceral level, like your example, butterflies in my stomach. It conjures a very real physical sensation, doesn't it? Because it's inherently linked to personal experiences. As learners, how do we begin to tap into that kind of emotional depth and weave it into our English thoughts rather than just, intellectually understanding a phrase?
This brings up a profoundly important question because you've really hit upon a fundamental truth. Emotional connection is absolutely vital for achieving that deep, native-like fluency. This process, sometimes called emotional anchoring, draws from insights in affective neuroscience. That's the field studying how the brain's limbic system, our emotional center, intricately intertwines language with emotions. Research in this area reveals something quite interesting. Bilingual individuals often process emotional words more slowly in their second language.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it seems to happen because the amygdala, which is often called our brain's emotional switchboard, doesn't light up quite as readily for words in a second language. It's almost as if your emotional circuit for English isn't fully wired yet, unless you consciously work to forge those deep feeling-to-word connections. It highlights that true emotional fluency isn't automatic. It's actually a skill you actively cultivate, like building a whole new set of emotional associations directly in English.
So it's not enough to simply know the dictionary definition of anxiety. You need to genuinely feel the butterflies in English, too. That makes sense. How do we start actually building those feeling-to-word connections then?
That's the key. For advanced learners, Cultivating this involves actively journaling, or even just mentally narrating intense experiences exclusively in English. For instance, after a thrilling concert, instead of just thinking, I had fun, try describing it vividly in English in your head. Wow, the crowd's energy was absolutely electric. I felt like I was on cloud nine, totally lost in the music.
Yeah.
Or, when you're faced with a really frustrating delay, mentally express it. Arg, I was absolutely fuming, felt ready to blow a gasket from the sheer inconvenience.
Right.
This approach beautifully mirrors how native children acquire their first language, through emotionally charged, significant interactions that bind words directly to feelings, bypassing any purely intellectual meaning stage. It grounds the language in your actual lived experience.
I really like that idea of narrating your own life in English, especially the highs and the lows. It makes the language feel truly personal, not just academic.
Exactly. And you can amplify this significantly through multimedia, which is excellent for sensory engagement. Watch emotionally resonant scenes from films. Maybe consider a powerful drama, something that really pulls at your heartstrings, and mentally narrate your reactions as the story unfolds. Ask yourself, what are the characters feeling? What are you feeling as you watch? Psychologically, this process can actually release endorphins, those feel-good chemicals in your brain. This makes the learning process not only more enjoyable and rewarding, but also, well, more addictive in a positive sense. It can significantly accelerate fluency by making the experience deeply rewarding. You start associating English not just with study or effort, but with powerful emotional experiences.
It also sounds like it would add a layer of authenticity to your thought process, wouldn't it? Beyond just having accurate vocabulary.
Yes, and there's also a subtle but significant nuance here concerning cultural emotions. American English, for instance, often tends to amplify positivity with expressions like awesome or that's fantastic, and in contrast, Australian English might downplay positive feelings with phrases such as, yeah, not bad, mate, even when referring to something quite good.
Right, the famous understatement again, but applying to positive things too.
Correct. Attuning your internal thoughts to these subtle cultural differences helps you avoid what we might call emotional dissonance, where your internal expression of an emotion doesn't quite match the cultural expectation or norm. Thinking in these culturally appropriate emotional registers makes your thoughts feel more natural, more integrated, and truly more native-like. It's about understanding and internalizing the unspoken emotional code of a particular culture.
Let's talk about confidence. Many advanced learners, despite having really impressive skills, they can navigate complex conversations very well. They still confront what gets called language anxiety. Yeah, this psychological state where the fear of making errors just stifles their ability to express themselves freely. It's almost like a form of imposter syndrome, isn't it? Where you feel like you're not truly fluent enough, that maybe you're just pretending despite all the knowledge and hard work you've put in.
That's a remarkably apt description. Imposter syndrome perfectly captures that feeling of inadequacy, that fear of being found out. And this anxiety often stems from a deep-seated drive for perfectionism, a trait that's frequently instilled by more formal educational settings where accuracy is absolutely paramount. Native speakers, on the other hand, typically embrace imperfection much more readily in casual settings. They might correct themselves mid-thought, sure, or simply laugh off minor slips without giving it a second thought. They tend to prioritize communication, the flow of ideas, over flawless grammar in everyday conversation. Drawing from Albert Bandura's work on self-efficacy theory, confidence genuinely builds through what he called mastery experiences. These are the small, incremental successes that gradually accumulate and snowball, reinforcing your belief in your own capabilities. It's about gathering evidence, bit by bit, that you can do it.
So it's about shifting from fearing mistakes to seeing them as an inevitable, maybe even valuable part of the learning process, just like a native speaker would instinctively do. How do we achieve that profound mental shift, especially when maybe years of learning have taught us to avoid errors at all costs?
Reframing your mindset is incredibly powerful here. You should consciously begin to view your English thoughts not as evaluations to be judged or graded.
Like a test.
Exactly, not like a test, but rather as experiments to be explored, as mental drafts that don't need to be perfect right away. Positive affirmations can be surprisingly effective too. Things like, my English is constantly evolving, and that's powerful. Every thought is a step forward. This can counteract the negative self-talk that often fuels language anxiety. Research from psychology actually demonstrates that this kind of cognitive reframing can reduce cortisol levels. That's the stress hormone thereby freeing up valuable cognitive resources. So instead of your brain being preoccupied with anxiety and fear, it can dedicate that energy to more fluid and spontaneous thinking, allowing ideas to flow much more unhindered. It's really about giving yourself permission to be imperfect in your internal dialogue.
That sounds like a powerful way to just reduce the mental burden, doesn't it? And unlock mental energy for actually using English.
Absolutely. And group dynamics, or rather social context, is also quite significant, even when you're just thinking internally. Native speakers tend to think within social context, often anticipating responses and formulating their thoughts with an awareness of who they might be talking to. You can simulate this mentally. Ask yourself, okay, if I were saying this thought to a friend, how might they reply? Or if I said it to my boss, what tone would I use? This practice, which is inspired by studies on theory of mind, our ability to understand others' mental states enhances both empathy and adaptability in your English thought processes. It prepares you for real-world interactions even when you're just thinking to yourself, making your internal monologues more dynamic and socially intelligent.
So you're practicing the social aspect even before you speak.
In a way, yes. So in essence, the psychology of native thinking is built upon this powerful, interconnected triad. First, minimizing linguistic interference by creating those dedicated English zones. Second, deeply embedding emotions directly within the language itself. And third, consistently bolstering your confidence by embracing imperfection and actively reframing your mindset. Master these foundational elements, and English truly begins to feel like your mental home turf, a natural and comfortable space for all your thoughts.
Okay, we've laid a really strong foundation with the psychology of native thinking, understanding those underlying cognitive shifts. That's fascinating. Now, let's translate that theory into practical, actionable steps. What are some daily habits, beyond just the generic advice of practice more English, that an advanced learner can actually adopt to truly rewire their thought patterns? How do we make English an intuitive, continuous process inside our heads? This is where it gets really interesting. How do we make this practical day to day?
Right, this is about application. And these tips emphasize a truly holistic approach, moving beyond just academic study into integrated life practice. Each strategy we'll discuss comes complete with specific, actionable exercises, the underlying rationale for why it works, and various adaptations tailored for different learning styles, because not everyone learns the same way. The overarching goal here is to make these advanced thought patterns not just accessible, but truly second nature, so they become automatic, effortless processes. Hashtag A2A. Cultivate a persistent English internal monologue.
This first one sounds absolutely fundamental. If we want to think like a native, our inner voice, that constant internal chatter we all have, it has to start speaking English more often, right? It can't be constantly translating from our native language in the background.
That's precisely it. The bedrock, the absolute foundation of native cognition, is an unbroken internal narrative in English. Natives don't consciously sit there and decide to think in English. It's just an automatic, continuous, almost unheard process most of the time. To achieve this, you need to commit to maintaining an English monologue for progressively escalating periods each day. You can start small with mundane everyday routines. While you're cooking, think step by step in English. Okay, I need to chop the onions finely now, then saute them until they're golden. Ooh, that smells absolutely divine.
Narrating the small stuff.
Exactly. Then, as you get more comfortable, challenge yourself to advance to more abstract reflections. For example, during your commute, maybe ponder something like, democracy's inherent flaws certainly include its susceptibility to populism, but its enduring strengths really lie in its system of checks and balances. This direct processing completely eliminates that translation lag we talked about. It aligns beautifully with ideas like Krashen's input hypothesis.
Krashen's input hypothesis. That's a cornerstone concept in language acquisition, isn't it? Could you briefly maybe unpack how that ties into developing this internal English monologue?
Sure. Krashen's theory essentially states that we acquire language best by understanding messages that are just a little bit beyond our current level, what he famously called I+1, or comprehensible input plus one. Now, when you're constantly generating English thoughts internally, you're essentially providing yourself with this continuous stream of comprehensible input, but it's coming from within. By cutting out the translation step, you're forcing your brain to process English directly. This perfectly aligns with his idea that acquisition happens most effectively when we focus on the meaning, not just the grammatical form, within that slightly challenging I+1 zone. You're basically becoming your own primary source of English input, tailored perfectly to your level.
That makes perfect sense. You're feeding your brain exactly what it needs from the inside out. So what's a good practical way to practice this internal monologue beyond just, thinking? Is there anything more active?
Yes. A highly effective exercise is audio journaling. Simply grab your phone and record your daily thoughts out loud in English. Don't worry about perfection at all. Just let the English flow naturally. Later, you can listen back, maybe even transcribe parts of it, and refine your thoughts for fluency and precision. For visual learners, mind mapping your thoughts on paper or using a digital tool can be incredibly beneficial. It lets you see the connections and structure your English thinking visually. Auditory learners, on the other hand, might find it helpful to actually speak their thoughts aloud, even if it's just softly to themselves, to fully engage their auditory processing. Psychologically, this consistent active repetition helps ingrain these patterns via long-term potentiation in the hippocampus that's your brain's memory control center. It's like forging a mental superhighway, making those English pathways incredibly robust and your brain's go-to routes for thought. They become faster and more automatic over time.
Okay, that's helpful. And what if someone speaks multiple languages already? How do they prevent maybe diluting their English efforts or having their other languages interfere too much with this process?
That's a common question for multilinguals. A useful adaptation is to consider alternating your internal monologue languages, perhaps on a weekly or even daily basis. This helps maintain balance in your linguistic skills without diluting your focused English immersion. For example, you might dedicate Mondays entirely to English thought, Tuesdays to another language, and so on. This trains your brain in distinct language modes and strengthens your ability to switch between them cleanly. #B. Internalize idioms through contextual webs and storytelling.
Idioms. They're always a challenge, aren't they? They never seem to mean what the words actually say, kick the bucket, spill the beans. How do native speakers just know them so instinctively? And more importantly, how can we get there?
You're right. Idioms can be really perplexing because their meaning is non-literal. It's figurative. The core idea, though, is that idioms aren't just isolated phrases for native speakers. They are seamlessly woven into these interconnected thought webs in their minds. For example, the phrase "spill the beans" immediately connects to a whole network of concepts related to secrecy, betrayal, gossip, revealing information. Sometimes, learning their etymologies, their origins, can make them incredibly sticky and memorable. For instance, spill the beans might originate from ancient Greek voting practices where beans were used to cast votes, and spilling them revealed the secret ballot. That backstory helps anchor the meaning.
That's a brilliant way to make them stick, giving them a backstory or a mental map rather than just a dry definition from a dictionary.
Indeed. So you should actively try to build these contextual webs in your own mind. Start from an idiom like "under the weather," which simply means feeling ill. From there, you can then link it to related concepts or other idioms, perhaps "fair weather friend," which describes an unreliable companion who's only around during the good times. Then, the real magic happens when you start using them actively in little mental stories. Okay, so I was feeling really under the weather yesterday, so I decided to call my supposed friend for help, the fair weather one. But guess what? They completely ghosted me talk about adding insult to injury. This narrative approach cements their meaning and usage contexts, making them feel like natural parts of your mental toolkit, ready to be deployed spontaneously when the situation fits.
That's a very creative way to learn them, definitely far beyond just using flashcards. What specific exercises could someone do daily with this storytelling approach?
Well, you could engage in daily idiom immersion. Pick maybe 2 or 3 new idioms each day, and instead of just memorizing them, challenge yourself to craft a short, imaginative mental narrative that incorporates them naturally within a few minutes. For learners who are more kinesthetic, who learn by doing, physically acting out little scenarios related to the idioms, even subtly with gestures while you're thinking, can enhance retention and understanding. It adds a physical dimension to the mental process. This kind of associative learning, which follows Pavlovian principles where ideas become linked through repetition, makes the recall and application of idioms almost reflexive, rather than a conscious, effortful search. You're training your brain to make those connections automatically.
And are there significant regional differences with idioms that an advanced learner should be aware of when they're building these mental webs?
Oh, absolutely. English is full of regional variations. You might notice things like American English often using a piece of cake versus British English favoring easy as pie, both meaning something is very simple but culturally distinct. Or consider take a rain check in the US for postponing something versus getting a rain check as a noun in the UK. Consciously thinking about and even using these different dialects or regional variations in your internal monologue adds significant versatility to your cognitive understanding and usage of English. It prepares you much better for a truly global English-speaking world. #C. Engage in deep, active listening with mental rephrasing.
Native speakers often seem to just, I don't know, absorb language from their environment. They pick up nuances, rhythm, unspoken rules almost without trying. For learners, that often feels impossible or incredibly slow. How do we make that absorption process more deliberate and effective for accelerating our own internal English thinking?
That's a key difference. The core idea here is that natives truly absorb language ambiently, extracting nuances almost subconsciously. For you, the advanced learner, this process needs to be a deliberate, active act, at least initially. The application involves listening intently to authentic English podcasts or audio resources, maybe shows like Radiolab for diverse topics, or perhaps The Economist audio for more analytical content, whatever interests you. And as you listen, the key is to mentally rephrase the main points in your own words. For instance, if you hear a news report state, climate change is accelerating at an unprecedented rate, you could immediately prompt the internal thought, okay, so global warming is really picking up speed. The consequences ahead seem increasingly dire. Sounds like we really need to act fast. This mental rephrasing builds crucial paraphrasing skills, which are absolutely vital for achieving native-like flexibility in both expression and understanding. It's how you truly internalize information, not just passively hear it.
That's a fantastic technique. It really forces you to check if you truly understood the meaning, not just recognize the words. It demands deeper processing.
Indeed. And a powerful exercise related to this is shadowing with a twist. Shadowing, where you repeat what you hear. With this twist, you pause the audio periodically, and instead of just repeating, you try to predict the next sentence or the main idea in your thoughts. Then you press play and compare your prediction to what's actually said. This immediate feedback loop is incredibly potent. It trains your brain to anticipate linguistic patterns and generate English more proactively. For more analytical learners, you can make a mental note of rhetorical devices the speaker uses: metaphors, similes, irony. How are they constructing their argument or painting a picture? Psychologically, this sharpens predictive processing in the brain's language centers, making you a more anticipatory and fluent thinker, almost staying a step ahead of the conversation internally.
And what about varying the listening material? Does sticking to just one accent or type of content limit your thinking development?
It's critically important to diversify your sources. Absolutely. Listen to a wide variety of accents and speaking styles. Tune into the global intonations you hear in TED Talks. Contrast that with the satirical American cadence found in shows like The Daily Show. Or maybe listen to BBC documentaries for various British accents. This broadens your mental auditory palette and prepares your internal ear for diverse real-world interactions and thought patterns. It ensures you're not developing a kind mental accent limited to just one variant of English. #, #TD. Conduct solo mental debates for critical thinking.
Okay, this next one sounds like an excellent way to push your thinking beyond just recounting facts or making simple observations. Natives seem to be able to effortlessly weigh pros and cons, explore complex ideas, even challenge their own assumptions, all inside their heads. How can we cultivate that kind of mental agility?
That's spot on. The core idea is that native speakers often deliberate internally with remarkable ease, fluidly weighing pros and cons, exploring different angles spontaneously. You can practice this deliberately by selecting contentious topics that genuinely interest you, things you have an opinion on or want to explore. For example, maybe ponder artificial intelligence. Is it truly a savior for humanity, or is it actually a looming threat? First, argue affirmatively in your mind. Okay, AI significantly boosts efficiency. It's revolutionizing fields like medicine and data analysis. It could potentially solve grand global challenges. Then immediately pivot and counter with opposing thoughts. But its rapid deployment could spark widespread job displacement, it might deepen societal inequality, and it raises profound ethical questions about control and autonomy.
So it's literally like having a miniature but vigorous debate club right inside your own head. That sounds like it would build a lot of mental flexibility and speed.
It absolutely does. To make this a really effective exercise, you could even set timed mental debates for yourself. Perhaps 5 minutes arguing for one side, then 5 minutes for the other, mimicking a real debate format. Consciously try to employ sophisticated transition words and phrases in your thoughts, like conversely, that being said, on the other hand, or however, one must also consider. To structure your arguments logically and connect your thoughts smoothly. And for individuals with a more creative inclination, why not infuse some humor into your mental arguments? Okay, AI might indeed take my job eventually, but hey, at least it'll probably write better puns than I ever could. This practice really hones your argumentation skills, reminiscent perhaps of Aristotelian logic, all happening within the English language. It makes your thoughts more structured, persuasive, and intellectually robust.
And I imagine you can tailor the debate topics to whatever you're deeply interested in personally, making it much more engaging.
Absolutely essential. Tech enthusiasts can mentally debate the merits of the latest gadgets or the ethical implications of new software releases. Foodies could delve into culinary trends, the pros and cons of organic farming versus conventional, or the global impact of food supply chains. Tailoring topics to your personal interests keeps the exercise engaging, relevant, and intrinsically motivating because you're genuinely curious about exploring the different facets of the issue in your own mind. ####EE. Read voraciously with active synthesis and application.
Reading is, of course, a common tip for language learners, but often it can feel like passive comprehension. You read the words, you understand them, but that's it. How do we make reading more than just absorbing words? How can it actually help us think like a native, truly internalizing those linguistic structures and patterns?
That's a great point. The core idea is that reading isn't just passive absorption. When done actively, it subconsciously imprints native linguistic structures, common sentence patterns, and natural phrasing directly into your brain's framework for English. The application involves tackling diverse genres. Don't limit yourself to just one type of text. Delve into literary fiction, maybe pick up a novel by Kazuo Ishiguro for deep introspection and beautifully nuanced language. Then switch to nonfiction works, perhaps Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, for insights into social dynamics and structured argumentation. And don't forget online forums like Quora or Reddit. They're fantastic for exposure to authentic colloquialisms, informal language, and current opinions expressed naturally. After reading a chapter or a significant article, take a moment to mentally summarize it. Okay, Ishiguro really explores the fragility of memory and identity here. It's truly haunting stuff, makes you question your own past. Then, crucially, try to apply it to your own life or experiences. Yes, much like how I sometimes cling to those cherished childhood memories, even though I know they might be a bit embellished over time.
So it's really not just about what you read, but what you actively do with it mentally afterwards. That active engagement, the synthesis and application sounds absolutely key.
Precisely. An effective exercise is to paraphrase passages you've just read in varying styles. Try taking a formal paragraph and mentally rewriting it in a much more casual, maybe even slangy tone. How would you explain that same idea to a friend? For learners who benefit from tactile engagement, digitally annotating or highlighting key passages as you read can enhance focus and create a physical connection to the text. Psychologically, this active process leverages what's called schema activation. It means you're effectively integrating the new information from your reading with your existing knowledge frameworks, making the new language and ideas stick much better. They become part of your mental furniture, not just isolated facts. You're not just storing new words. You're building a rich, interconnected network of ideas in English.
And beyond just traditional text, what about visuals? Can things like graphic novels play a role in this active reading and thinking process?
Incorporating visuals is a really smart move, actually. Explore graphic novels like Art Spiegelman's Mouse or Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, which powerfully combine narrative with evocative imagery. This can significantly help you think more descriptively, forcing you to connect visual cues with their English interpretations and expanding your ability to describe what you see, feel, and imagine directly in English. It engages multiple parts of your brain simultaneously, strengthening the learning. #F. Incorporate slang, colloquialisms, and fillers naturally.
Okay, let's talk about the really informal stuff. Native speakers often have this natural, casual flair in their thinking, using expressions like, "that's dope" for something impressive, or just naturally weaving in words like or, without sounding awkward. How do we, as learners, adopt that kind of authenticity in our internal dialogue without sounding forced or, unnatural?
That's a common concern. The core idea is that native speakers think with a certain casual flair because it reflects how they actually speak. They integrate phrases like "that's dope" or "that's brilliant" quite spontaneously when something genuinely impresses them. You can track current trends by consulting resources like Urban Dictionary, following social media influencers from different English-speaking regions, or just paying close attention during informal conversations you overhear or participate in. A good exercise is to consciously give your more formal internal thoughts a mental makeover sometimes. Recast them in a slangy or colloquial way just for practice. For instance, if you just had a very productive meeting, instead of the formal mental affirmation, "the meeting was highly productive," you might internally think, "wow, that meeting absolutely killed it. We got a ton done." Or, "yeah, the meeting slayed." This practice injects a sense of authenticity and conversational ease into your internal voice over time.
And what about those little filler words and sounds like, that people use constantly in real speech. They often get edited out of formal writing, but they're so prevalent in natural conversation. Should we use them in our thoughts?
That brings us to a useful psychological tip. Judiciously using common fillers and discourse markers I mean, or so to speak, in your mental monologue can actually be beneficial. They're not just wasted words or signs of uncertainty. They often serve important functions in natural speech, like signaling a thought process, holding the floor, or adding emphasis or nuance. They can actually aid conversational flow internally too, giving your brain a fraction of a second to organize its thoughts and preventing you from overthinking or getting stuck mentally. They give your internal voice a more natural rhythm and cadence. The key, of course, is moderation to maintain clarity. But their strategic use can make your internal English feel much more natural and less robotic, less like reading from a script. They are part of the natural melody of native speech patterns. #G. Visualize and simulate real-life scenarios.
Mentally. This next one sounds intriguing. Native speakers often seem to preempt interactions by mentally rehearsing them, almost without conscious effort. They play out potential conversations in their heads beforehand. How can we harness that power of mental simulation to improve our own English thinking and prepare for real situations?
The core idea is exactly that. Natives frequently, often subconsciously, preempts interactions by mentally rehearsing them. You can apply this technique very deliberately by imagining everyday scenarios, like ordering food at a busy restaurant or asking for directions. In your mind, think through the entire interaction. Okay, I'll have the burger, please, but could I hold the onions? Oh, and a side salad, cheers. But don't just think the words. Visualize the entire interaction with rich sensory details, the tone of voice you'd use, the gestures you might make, like pointing, the expression on the server's face, the bustling environment around you. This full sensory experience makes the mental simulation much more powerful and realistic.
So it's not just about scripting the words you'd say, but immersing yourself in the whole multi-sensory experience of a real interaction. That makes a lot of sense for really cementing language use and context.
Absolutely. A powerful exercise building on this is scenario scripting. Mentally rehearse more complex upcoming situations. Job interviews, first dates, presentations, or even potential debates or difficult conversations. And crucially, don't just script the perfect interaction. Include potential mishaps or unexpected turns. Okay, what if they ask me this tricky question? If I flub the answer initially, I'll recover by acknowledging it with a bit of humor. Maybe say something like, well, that didn't quite come out as planned, did it? Let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
The psychological benefit here is immense. This kind of multisensory engagement significantly solidifies your thoughts and potential responses, making them more resilient, readily accessible, and adaptable when you face the actual situation in real time. You're essentially pre-programming your brain for success and flexibility in English, even in challenging moments. #H. Explore phrasal verbs and prepositions through pattern recognition.
The dreaded phrasal verbs and prepositions. They are notoriously tricky for learners because they often seem so arbitrary, so illogical. Put up with, put off, put out. They all use put but mean different things. Native speakers seem to just intuit the right one. How can we get to that level of intuitive understanding in our own thoughts?
You're right, these can be quite challenging. But the key is that native speakers don't usually memorize lists. They intuit them because they recognize underlying patterns, not just individual definitions. The core idea for learners is to consciously look for and group similar phrasal verbs or prepositions that function similarly. For instance, consider the put examples: put up with, tolerate, put off, delay, put out, extinguish or inconvenience. Or think of the various common uses of the preposition up: wake up, stand up, cheer up, give up. Notice the patterns. An effective exercise involves conducting mental drills where you list these variations and then actively use them in full, grammatically correct sentences in your head. Okay, I can put up with the daily traffic on my commute, but sometimes the noise really puts me off my game for the rest of the morning. I wish they wouldn't put out so much construction noise.
So it's about seeing the connections and maybe the underlying logic, even if it's subtle, rather than trying to memorize each one in complete isolation. That sounds much more efficient and less overwhelming.
It generally is. The psychological benefit here is that this focus on pattern recognition, facilitated by what cognitive scientists call chunking theory, dramatically speeds up recall and makes these complex structures feel more manageable. Your brain starts to see, for example, put plus preposition as a family of related verbs with distinct but related meanings, rather than hundreds of individual unrelated items to memorize. This makes them feel less arbitrary and more intuitive over time, allowing you to use them more spontaneously and correctly in your thoughts without that constant, effortful searching for the right one. #I. Practice abstract and philosophical thinking in English.
It's easy, I think, for learners to get stuck in practical, everyday English. Describing your day, ordering food, talking about hobbies. But truly thinking like a native surely means going beyond that, engaging with complex, abstract ideas, right?
Yeah.
How do we push our internal English into that deeper, more sophisticated territory?
Indeed, that's a vital step for advanced fluency. The core idea is to consciously advance beyond concrete, everyday thoughts and really push your mind into deeper conceptual territory using English. You can apply this by deliberately pondering complex ethical questions exclusively in English. For example, in your mind, grapple with something like, is the philosophical concept of utilitarianism fundamentally flawed? Because it often seems to ignore individual rights in favor of what it deems the greater good. This kind of mental wrestling demands, and therefore develops, a higher level of linguistic sophistication and nuance. An effective exercise is to engage in daily philosophizing, even briefly. Reflect on current news events or social issues, not just reporting the facts in your head, but exploring the underlying implications. This proposed government policy certainly seems utilitarian in its stated aims, but at what potential cost to individual freedoms and long-term social cohesion?
That's a powerful way to really expand your mental toolkit, isn't it? It forces you to articulate complex arguments and nuanced positions entirely in English.
Absolutely. The psychological benefit of this practice is that it profoundly expands your cognitive depth and flexibility within the English language itself. It forces you to engage with more nuanced vocabulary, sophisticated logical connectors, like furthermore, consequently nonetheless, and complex sentence structures, all of which become more second nature when you regularly apply them to abstract thought. It effectively moves you from merely describing the world around you in English to interpreting, analyzing, and critically evaluating it, all within the framework of the English language. #J. Integrate humor and wordplay into thoughts.
Okay, humor and wordplay often feel like the final frontier for language learners, maybe the Mount Everest of fluency. Natives can pun effortlessly, like that classic example, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. It seems so spontaneous, so playful. How do we even begin to develop that kind of linguistic agility in our internal English?
You've identified a key marker of very advanced native-like fluency. The core idea is that natives often pun and engage in wordplay effortlessly because their brain is already playing with the language at a deeper, more flexible level. They see the multiple meanings and potential connections. An excellent exercise is to consciously practice creating mental puns yourself. Actively look for opportunities in your everyday thoughts or observations where a word has multiple meanings or sounds like another word. For instance, if you're thinking about someone quitting their job at a bakery, you might mentally quip, just for yourself, the baker stopped making donuts. I guess he got tired of the whole business.
Okay, that's a good one. Did you actually say that out loud just now, or was that an internal chuckle you translated?
Not initially. It started as an internal chuckle, absolutely. But that mental playfulness, that willingness to bend the rules and explore the sounds and meanings of words, that's the cognitive muscle we're trying to build here. The psychological benefit here is immense, actually. Firstly, humor lightens the entire learning process, making it more enjoyable and less intimidating. Furthermore, it significantly boosts retention because humor often involves a clever twist or an unexpected connection, which makes the underlying language structure or vocabulary more memorable. It shows your brain is becoming truly agile in English, ready to manipulate the language not just for communication, but also for amusement and deeper meaning. All right, so we've explored the foundational psychology and we've established some really transformative daily habits. That's a fantastic roadmap. Now, what does this all mean for maybe accelerating our journey towards native-like cognition? Beyond the consistent, steady effort, are there any clever tricks or, psychological hacks we can leverage for more rapid gains? Almost like mental shortcuts to speed things up. Absolutely. Think of these next ideas as tricks, or perhaps accelerators. They're specifically designed to exploit certain psychological hacks for potentially swift gains. They cleverly leverage principles like spaced repetition, gamification, and even cognitive biases to really supercharge your progress and make the learning process feel more dynamic and efficient. Think of these as high-leverage techniques, particularly useful for advanced learners looking for that extra boost. #A. Extended shadowing sessions with variation.
We touched on shadowing earlier, repeating what you hear, but how can we make it ingenious, a true shortcut for developing native-like thinking and speaking patterns?
Right, the core idea of basic shadowing is immediately repeating what you hear to mimic pronunciation and rhythm. To turn it into an accelerator trick, you need to extend this significantly. Try shadowing entire speeches or long podcast segments, not just short phrases. And crucially, vary your speed. Try shadowing faster than slower than the original. Even try to replicate different accents and intonations deliberately. A key technique is to record overlays of your shadowing attempt alongside the original audio. Listening back to that comparison provides incredibly detailed self-feedback. The comparison is where the real accelerated learning happens. And here's the ingenious part. Consciously add emotions. Shadow a monologue trying to sound angry, then joyfully, then with deep contemplation, actively trying to convey a specific feeling in your voice, matching the original if possible. The psychological benefit here is profound. This doesn't just enhance your prosody, the natural rhythm and intonation of speech, but it also dramatically improves your overall expressiveness and your accessible emotional range in English. It makes your internal voice incredibly rich and flexible. Tag B. Construct elaborate word association networks.
This sounds like a powerful way to make words really stick together in your mind, building a much richer internal dictionary than just lists of definitions.
Indeed. The core idea is to move far beyond simple one-to-one definitions and actively map out elaborate clusters of related words and concepts. For instance, starting from a core word like storm, you might branch out visually or mentally to brainstorm, related to generating ideas, like a storm of thoughts. Then maybe connect that to the idiom storm in a teacup, an overreaction to a minor issue, and perhaps even to weather the storm, meaning to endure hardship. The trick here is to utilize digital tools or apps, like mind mapping software, or even just pen and paper, to create interactive dynamic maps of these connections. Visually seeing the relationships between words strengthens the links. The psychological benefit of this active practice is that it deliberately builds semantic networking within your brain. You're creating dense webs of meaning, not just isolated points. This allows for much quicker and more intuitive word access when you're thinking or speaking, as your brain can jump rapidly from one related concept to another with far greater ease. Hashtag C. Improvisational role-playing with constraints.
Mental role-playing sounds like it could be fun, but how do we make it truly accelerate cognition and really push our linguistic boundaries beyond just simple practice?
Right, the basic idea is to mentally role-play as different characters, perhaps imagining historical figures debating modern issues in English, or maybe your favorite fictional characters having a chat about current events. The ingenious trick, the accelerator, is to introduce creative constraints into these mental improvisations. For example, try to role-play a conversation or a mental debate without using any words that contain the letter E, a surprisingly difficult challenge. Or perhaps try to only use words with 3 syllables or more. These constraints force you into highly creative and adaptive thinking that push your linguistic boundaries and compel your brain to find alternative vocabulary, phrasing, and sentence structures on the fly. The psychological benefit is that this builds remarkable linguistic adaptability and strengthens real-time problem-solving skills directly within the English language framework, making your mental processes incredibly flexible and inventive. Hashtag D. Circumlocution games for vocabulary gaps.
Okay, we've all had those incredibly frustrating moments where a specific English word just won't come to mind, even though we know the concept perfectly well. How can we turn that common frustration into an ingenious trick for improvement?
That's a universal experience for language learners, isn't it? The core idea is circumlocution. When you can't recall a specific term, you practice describing the concept effectively without using the direct word. So you might think, okay, it's that flying machine. It's got the large spinning blades on top. Oh, right, a helicopter. The trick to accelerate this is to turn it into a game. Engage in partner challenges either through language learning apps that offer such features or simply with a study buddy. Take turns describing objects, concepts, or famous people without using their names or key identifying words. This gamified approach pushes you to be incredibly resourceful and creative in your English descriptions under pressure. The psychological benefit is significant. This turns vocabulary limitations from frustrating blocks into powerful opportunities for strengthening your descriptive abilities. You become more articulate and versatile, able to convey meaning fluently even when a precise word momentarily eludes you, which, by the way, is a hallmark of native fluency too. Hashtag TVN.
Media consumption, watching movies, TV shows, is a given for most learners, but often it's just passive entertainment. How do we transform media binging into a focused trick for accelerating native cognition and deep cultural understanding?
Great question. The core idea is to truly immerse yourself in authentic English media, but not just for passive entertainment. Approach it with an active learning mindset. Go ahead and binge watch entire series, perhaps comparing the US version of The Office with the original UK version to actively pick up on the subtle and not so subtle cultural nuances, different styles of humor, and social dynamics. While watching, actively try to think in the dialogues of the characters. Try predicting their responses or reflecting on their motivations and choices, all in English. The ingenious trick here is to actively predict plot twists or character reactions in English as you watch. Pause the show occasionally and ask yourself, okay, what do I think will happen next? Why did she react like that? What's his underlying motivation? This active engagement goes far beyond passive viewing. The psychological benefit is that this fosters deep contextual absorption of both language and culture simultaneously. It helps you build intuition for native thought patterns, common conversational rhythms, and underlying cultural sensibilities much faster than passive watching alone. Hashtag filler and discourse marker drills.
We talked about those little filler words and discourse markers native speakers use, basically, like so to speak. They seem so subtle, almost subconscious. Can we consciously practice thinking with those, and how would that work as a trick?
Absolutely. The core idea is to practice consciously incorporating these common fillers and discourse markers into your internal thought stream, not just your spoken language. Phrases like basically, actually, or so to speak. Remember, these aren't just verbal crutches. They often serve important pragmatic functions in natural speech, signaling thought processes, managing turns, adding emphasis, or softening statements. The trick is to actively analyze how they're used in real-world speech. Watch TED Talks, listen to natural interviews, or pay attention to casual conversations, specifically observing the placement and function of these markers. Ask yourself, why do they say actually there? What function did you know serve? Then consciously try to use them appropriately in your own internal monologue where they feel natural. This isn't about peppering your thoughts with meaningless fillers, but understanding their role and integrating them strategically. The psychological benefit is that it significantly improves the natural coherence and flow of your internal monologue, making it sound and feel more native-like, less stilted or overly formal. They help give your thoughts a more authentic conversational rhythm. #TAG. Reverse engineering content for originality.
This next one sounds like a really creative way to generate authentic English thoughts from just a tiny starting point, almost like brainstorming, but in reverse. Can you explain that?
It is quite creative. The core idea is to start with something very simple. Maybe a news headline you just read, a single striking sentence from an article, or even just one interesting vocabulary word you learned. Then take that small seed and mentally expand it. Cultivate it into a full thought, a detailed paragraph, or even a short internal story, all elaborated purely in English. The ingenious trick, the accelerator part, is to mentally twist the endings, introduce unexpected elements, or deliberately explore alternative perspectives to your expanded thoughts. This playful approach encourages imaginative and divergent thinking. For instance, if the headline is simply, "New study links coffee to longer life," you might mentally expand. Okay, interesting. But while that's tempting to believe, could this just be a correlation, not necessarily causation? Perhaps people who drink coffee regularly also tend to have more active social lives. Or maybe they just have more positive outlooks generally. Maybe it's not the coffee itself, but the routine of starting the day with intention. The psychological benefit is that this practice fosters innovation and truly creative thinking directly within the English language framework. It makes you a more inventive, flexible, and original communicator, both internally and externally. #, mnemonic devices for complex structures.
Mnemonics memory aids are great for memorizing lists, like shopping lists or historical dates. But how can they possibly apply to thinking more fluently in complex English grammatical structures like conditionals or the subjunctive mood?
That's a good question. The core idea is to create memorable acronyms, vivid mental images, or short, catchy phrases to help you recall and correctly use complex or often confusing grammatical structures. Think about conditionals or the subjunctive mood, which can be tricky. A classic, though perhaps slightly dated example, is using the title of the song "If I Were a Rich Man" to help anchor the correct structure for the hypothetical subjunctive mood. If I were, not if I was. The ingenious trick here is to personalize these mnemonics. Link them directly to your own life events, your personal experiences, funny memories, or even inside jokes you have with yourself. This personal connection makes them far more potent and sticky in your memory. For instance, for the often confusing past perfect tense, had plus past participle, you might create a vivid mental image of a time-traveling chef who had already cooked the entire meal before the party guests even started arriving. Make it weird, make it memorable. The psychological benefit is that these personalized devices act as powerful, readily accessible memory aids. They make complex grammatical rules feel less abstract, more concrete, making them available for your internal thoughts much more quickly. This frees up cognitive space so you can focus on the meaning you want to express rather than consciously checking grammar rules. Hashtag, sensory linking for vocabulary.
We talked earlier about emotional anchoring for vocabulary. What about linking new words to our other senses? Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Can that act as a shortcut for making vocabulary more deeply ingrained?
That's a great connection to make. Yes, absolutely. The core idea is to link new vocabulary items directly to distinct, concrete sensory experiences. Don't just learn an abstract definition. Actively try to activate your senses in relation to the word. Connect the word pungent, for example, not just with the definition strong smelling, but with a specific, sharp, almost stinging smell of raw onions or strong vinegar. Connect velvety, not just with smooth like velvet, but with the luxurious, soft feel of a specific fabric you've touched. The trick to accelerate this is to practice mental sensory walks. As you go about your day, actively notice your surroundings and consciously describe your environment internally using vivid English vocabulary for each sense you experience. Oh, the morning air feels so crisp today, and the scent of freshly baked bread is wafting over from the bakery. I hear the distant drone of traffic. This multisensory engagement helps to create a much richer, more complex mental representation of words. The psychological benefit of this multisensory learning is that it profoundly enhances recall and deepens your understanding of words. It makes them truly come alive and feel readily accessible in your mind, not just as abstract symbols on a page, but as concepts grounded in real-world sensation. Hashtags, JB Pony challenges with rewards.
Okay, all these strategies, habits, and tricks require sustained effort and motivation over time. How do we keep that motivation high and make this whole journey feel enjoyable and sustainable rather than a chore?
That's the million-dollar question for any long-term learning goal, isn't it? The core idea here is to leverage the power of gamification, turning the process into a kind of game. Set specific, measurable, personal thought quotas or challenges for yourself. For example, okay, today I will consciously have at least 100 purely English thoughts, or this week I will try to use 5 new idioms naturally in my internal monologue before lunchtime each day. Make them achievable but challenging. Then, upon successful completion of your mini goal, give yourself a small, genuinely enjoyable reward. This could be anything that motivates you: 15 minutes of guilt-free social media browsing, a favorite snack, listening to a song you absolutely love, or watching a short, funny video. The trick is to potentially use apps that help track your progress or provide structured challenges, making it feel more like a game with clear milestones and immediate gratification. Or simply use a habit tracker. The psychological benefit here is powerful. This taps directly into your brain's dopamine-driven motivation system. Dopamine, often called the reward chemical, makes the entire learning process feel more rewarding, enjoyable, and crucially, much more sustainable in the long run. You're actively building positive associations with the act of thinking in English.
Right. Even with all these fantastic, insightful tips and these clever accelerator tricks, we know that the path towards native-like thinking isn't always smooth. It's definitely not a straight line upwards. What are some common pitfalls or obstacles that learners frequently encounter on this journey? And more importantly, how can we skillfully anticipate and sidestep them to maintain our progress and avoid getting stuck or, worse, discouraged?
That's a crucial area to address, definitely.
Yeah.
Because being forewarned really is forearmed in this case.
Uh-huh.
Recognizing these potential obstacles allows you, the learner, to develop proactive strategies for sustained growth and to prevent that feeling of discouragement when things inevitably get tough. We want to smooth out that learning curve as much as possible. #A. Over-reliance on formal structures.
Okay, first pitfall. It seems easy, especially after years of academic learning focused on grammar and proper usage, to get stuck in thinking in overly formal English. You're always trying to be correct, right?
Exactly. That's a very common pitfall. The danger is that thinking too formally all the time can make your internal dialogue sound quite robotic, maybe even unnatural, lacking the spontaneity and casual flow that characterizes most native speech and thought. It might be grammatically perfect, but it won't feel right or authentic. The powerful counter strategy is to consciously and gradually infuse more casual elements, relevant slang, where appropriate for your context, and common colloquialisms into your internal thoughts. Actively practice recasting formal thoughts into more informal ones, just for flexibility. For example, instead of internally thinking, I must endeavor to complete this task forthwith, try something more natural, like, okay, I really need to get this thing done soon, or gotta wrap this up. #B, neglecting pronunciation in mental rehearsals.
This is interesting. If you're doing all this thinking silently inside your head, how does that impact your eventual spoken English, or even just how your own internal voice sounds to you? Can that be a pitfall?
It absolutely can be. The pitfall here is that if you only ever think silently without paying any attention to the actual sounds of the language, you might miss out on critical phonetic practice. Your internal voice might be pronouncing words incorrectly or using the wrong stress patterns without you even realizing it. And those incorrect internal patterns can then translate directly into your spoken English when you try to articulate them. The effective counter is to consciously think with pronunciation in mind sometimes. Actively practice the phonetic elements, the rhythm, the intonation in your head, especially when you're mentally rehearsing conversations. You can even whisper to yourself or articulate silently, paying attention to how the words feel physically in your mouth and how they sound acoustically in your mind's ear. This builds a much stronger and more accurate sound-to-meaning connection. #tag ignoring nonverbal integration.
Communication is so much more than just the words we use, isn't it? It's body language, tone of voice, facial expressions. How does that translate to improving our internal thought process and making our internal English feel more real, more complete?
Indeed. The pitfall is ignoring this nonverbal integration. Communication isn't just words on a page or sound waves. It encompasses a whole suite of crucial nonverbal cues. If your internal monologue or mental simulations focus only on vocabulary and grammar, it's missing a huge piece of the real communication puzzle. Your internal practice becomes incomplete. The counter strategy is that when you're visualizing scenarios or mentally rehearsing conversations, like we discussed with scenario scripting, make sure to consciously include body language, gestures, and facial expressions in your mental simulations. Imagine the slight nod of agreement, the raised eyebrow of skepticism, the expressive hand gesture emphasizing a point. This makes the internal thought process more holistic and prepares you much better for richer, more authentic, and more nuanced real-world interactions. #D, immersion-induced burnout.
Okay, this sounds serious. All this intense focus, this constant mental effort required for immersion and thinking in English, that can be incredibly exhausting, can't it? How do we avoid just burning out and giving up or feeling completely overwhelmed by it all?
That's a very real and significant concern. The pitfall is immersion-induced burnout. When intense focus and constant mental effort are sustained for too long without breaks, it can easily lead to mental fatigue, mounting frustration, and eventual disengagement. It's simply unsustainable in the long run. The intelligent counter strategy is to schedule regular, deliberate breaks from intense English focus. Consciously mix your English immersion activities with other hobbies, relaxation techniques, or activities in your native language. Don't be afraid to completely switch off the English brain for a while each day or week. Balance is absolutely key to maintaining motivation and ensuring long-term progress. Pushing too hard consistently often leads to regression, not faster progress. #rebel cultural misalignments.
English is such a global language now, spoken natively in so many different cultures with different norms. How do we navigate those subtle or not so subtle differences in our internal thoughts and expressions without causing confusion or even unintentional offense when we eventually communicate?
It's a significant point, especially for advanced learners aiming for global competence. The pitfall is cultural misalignments. What's perfectly acceptable, polite, or clearly understood in one English-speaking culture, say American, might differ greatly in another, like British or Australian, leading to internal dissonance, confusion, or even miscommunication later. The counter is to actively study and become aware of regional variations in cultural norms associated with different Englishes. A classic, often humorous example we mentioned is fanny pack in American English, a small bag worn around the waist, versus bum bag in British English. Same object, but fanny has a very different vulgar meaning in the UK. Be aware of these subtle but important distinctions in your internal thoughts and adjust your mental vocabulary and even communication style expectations accordingly. Understanding the cultural context of a phrase or interaction pattern is often just as important as its literal meaning. #DAF plateauing motivation.
We all hit them plateaus. Progress in language learning isn't always a smooth upward curve. Sometimes it feels like you're stuck, treading water, not getting anywhere, or maybe even going backwards slightly. That can be incredibly demotivating.
That's a very common pitfall, perhaps one of the most common. Plateauing motivation occurs precisely because progress isn't always linear or easily visible day to day. You might feel stuck or that your significant efforts aren't yielding noticeable results, even when subtle progress is happening beneath the surface. The powerful counter here is twofold. First, set achievable, small, specific milestones rather than huge, vague goals. Second, make a conscious effort to celebrate every tiny success along the way. And third, regularly remind yourself, perhaps by reviewing past work or journal entries, of how far you've already come. Keep a mental or even physical log of your achievements, no matter how small they seem. Acknowledging progress is vital for maintaining momentum and boosting your self-efficacy, your belief that you can keep going. Break down the huge goal of native thinking into micro victories you can achieve this week or even today. #GKatie. Overthinking grammar.
This seems counterintuitive. We spend so much time and effort learning grammar rules and striving for correctness. Can that actually become a hindrance when trying to think fluently and spontaneously like a native?
It can, surprisingly, especially at the advanced stages. The pitfall is overthinking grammar. Becoming overly preoccupied with consciously applying grammatical rules in every single thought can seriously hinder fluid, spontaneous thinking. It creates too much mental friction and self-monitoring. The counter strategy, as you advance and your intuitive grasp of English structure improves significantly, is to consciously allow the explicit rules to fade into the background more often. Shift your primary focus instead towards conveying meaning naturally, effectively, and appropriately for the context, trusting your developed intuitive grasp of structure. Think of it like learning to ride a bicycle. Initially, you focus intensely on every single movement, balance, steering, pedaling, but eventually it becomes automatic and you just focus on where you want to go. Grammar should become similarly backgrounded for fluent thought. #H. Isolation from native input.
What happens if you're doing all this internal work, constantly thinking in English, but you're not regularly interacting with or consuming authentic content from native speakers? Can your internal thought patterns become sort of disconnected or weird?
That's a definite risk. The pitfall is isolation from fresh, authentic native input. Without consistent exposure to how English is actually being used now by native speakers, whether through conversation, current media, literature, or online interactions, your internal thoughts can indeed become stagnant. They might develop peculiar, perhaps slightly unnatural patterns based on older input, or simply lack the dynamism and relevance of living language. The crucial counter is to actively and continuously seek out opportunities for language exchanges, online or in person, join relevant online communities where native speakers interact, or attend virtual events, watch current movies or shows, listen to podcasts, anything that keeps your input fresh, dynamic, and reflective of current usage patterns and vocabulary. It's like constantly feeding your internal English brain with the most current and relevant linguistic data. #I. Emotional detachment.
We talked about emotional anchoring earlier. What's the pitfall if English just continues to feel like an academic exercise, purely intellectual, without that deeper connection?
The pitfall is emotional detachment. If English feels purely academic, disconnected from your personal life, your passions, your genuine interests, or your inner world, it simply won't anchor as deeply in your cognition. You won't truly feel the language, and therefore you won't truly own it in your thoughts. The powerful counter is to consciously make an effort to infuse passion, personal relevance, and genuine emotion into your English thoughts and reflections. Talk to yourself internally in English about what truly excites you, what makes you angry, what inspires you, what makes you laugh. Use English to explore your hobbies, your relationships, your dreams. Make it personal. Make it resonate with your deepest self. Don't just keep it in the study box. #GHN system practice.
And finally, perhaps the most fundamental pitfall that plagues any attempt to learn a new skill or build a new habit: consistency. I suppose that's a major stumbling block here too.
Indeed, it might be the biggest one. The pitfall is inconsistent practice. Irregular efforts simply yield irregular, fragmented results. You can't realistically expect native-like thought patterns to develop and become automatic if you only dabble occasionally or practice intensely for a week, then stop for a month. The most effective counter strategy, often recommended by habit formation experts, is to habit stack your English thinking practice with existing daily routines you already perform automatically. Integrate it seamlessly into something you already do without fail. While brushing your teeth, think in English. While waiting in line at the supermarket, narrate the scene internally in English. While showering, plan your day in English. Make it an organic, integrated, and non-negotiable part of your day, rather than seeing it as an extra task you have to remember or find time for. This consistent, pervasive immersion, even in small doses frequently, is the ultimate accelerator for making English thinking automatic.
And just to reinforce that these aren't insurmountable, are there examples of real people who have successfully navigated these very real challenges and actually reached that level of native-like thinking using this kinds of strategies?
Oh, absolutely. We see examples all the time. Think of learners like, say, Ahmed from Egypt, who very effectively overcame significant linguistic interference from Arabic by committing to daily journaling exclusively in English for over a year, meticulously correcting his own mental phrasing as he noticed L1 patterns creeping in. Or someone like Sophia from Brazil, who mastered complex English idioms not by rote memorization, but by creatively and humorously weaving them into her daily mental storytelling exercises, making them feel like a natural part of her personal narrative repertoire. These aren't just theoretical challenges outlined in textbooks. They are very real, everyday hurdles for advanced learners, and they are consistently overcome with targeted, persistent, and intelligent strategies. It shows that this journey, while challenging, is entirely achievable.
Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of English, and perhaps one of the most challenging for learners aiming for native thinking, is that it's not a single monolithic language at all. It's this vibrant, complex tapestry of different accents, unique expressions, and distinct cultural nuances stretching all across the globe. How does this incredible diversity impact our goal of thinking like a native speaker? And maybe more fundamentally, what does native even really mean in this context when there's so much variety out there?
This raises a profoundly important question, and it's absolutely vital for advanced learners to recognize that thinking like a native speaker isn't about perfectly replicating one single standard accent or dialect. Often, such a single standard doesn't even truly exist. Instead, it's much more about developing an understanding of and an ability to adapt to the incredible diversity within the English language globally. Different regions, shaped by their unique histories and cultures, naturally foster distinct thought patterns, different communication styles, unique cultural values, and characteristic expressions, all of which shape how ideas are formed and conveyed in that variant of English. So the goal becomes about becoming cognitively agile across these variants, or perhaps choosing to deeply specialize and immerse yourself in one particular variant that's most relevant to your life or goals.
Okay, let's start with perhaps the most widely exported variant, American English. What generally characterizes its underlying thought patterns, and how might that manifest internally for someone tuning into it?
American English, broadly speaking, is often characterized by a generally optimistic, can-do attitude and a quite forthright, direct communication style compared to some other variants. Think about illustrative phrases common in American culture like, "go for it," or "you got this." These don't just function as simple encouragement. They truly reflect a prevalent mindset that values boldness, taking initiative, and a preference for clear, unambiguous directness in both internal thought and external expression. So, your internal monologue, if you were deeply attuned to this variant, might naturally lean towards more explicit statements of intent, feeling, or opinion, perhaps with less hedging or ambiguity than in other cultures. You might find yourself thinking more readily in terms of clear goals, individual achievement, direct problem-solving approaches, and often maintaining a positive or proactive framing, even when discussing challenges.
How does that compare with British English? We often hear about the famous British understatement and perhaps a different sense of humor. How does that influence thinking?
British English, again generalizing, often features a distinct cultural preference for understatement, a dry, often self-deprecating wit, and perhaps a more reserved or indirect approach to expressing strong emotions or opinions, especially in initial interactions. For instance, a common phrase like, "could be worse," used in response to a difficult situation, isn't necessarily pessimistic. It often functions as a subtle way to temper potential over-optimism, acknowledge a challenge without overtly dramatizing it, or even express a mild, ironic form of resilience or acceptance. Your internal thoughts, if shaped by immersion in British culture and media, might naturally start to incorporate more implicit meanings, more nuanced sense of humor that relies heavily on irony and context, and perhaps a greater internal awareness of politeness strategies involving indirectness or subtle social commentary. You might find yourself thinking in more complex, often multi-layered ways, appreciating the power of the unsaid just as much as the explicitly stated.
And what about the distinctive Australian style? It's often perceived as very laid back, and they're famous for those abbreviated words, the diminutives. How does that reflect in thought?
Australian English is certainly renowned for its generally relaxed demeanor, that extensive use of diminutives, arvo for afternoon, brekkie for breakfast, barbie for barbecue, and a strong cultural emphasis on camaraderie, often referred to as mateship. The core idea here is that the concept of mateship extends beyond just being a word. It actively fosters a communal, often quite egalitarian, and highly practical way of thinking. Your internal thoughts, influenced by Australian English, might naturally become more abbreviated, perhaps more direct in a practical sense, cut into the chase without excessive formality. There's often an ease in internalizing and utilizing local slang and informal expressions quite freely in your mental dialogue. There tends to be a pragmatic, straightforward approach to problems, often underlined by a good-natured, resilient, and perhaps slightly anti-authoritarian tone.
India, of course, has a massive and diverse English-speaking population, and its variant, or rather variants, are incredibly rich and unique. How does Indian English influence thinking and internal expression?
Indian English offers a fascinating and unique blend, often seamlessly incorporating local linguistic structures, perhaps from Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, etc., syntax patterns, or even question formations, and frequently displaying a rich, often more overt expressiveness compared to some Western variants. The core idea is that you might find yourself, if immersed in this context, naturally incorporating Hindi loanwords or specific regional terms into your hybrid English thoughts, reflecting the deeply multicultural and multilingual reality of India. Linguistic fluidity is often the norm. The thought process itself can sometimes be more elaborative, using richer vocabulary or more complex sentence structures. And it's often comfortable with more overtly emotional or even dramatic expression than might be typical in some more reserved Western variants of English. This reflects cultural propensities for expressive communication, vivid storytelling, and strong interpersonal connections. The internal narrative might feel richer, more colorful.
Wow, the diversity is incredible. So, if someone listening wants to truly embrace these diverse nuances and genuinely learn to think flexibly across these different English variants, how do they practically go about achieving that?
To genuinely grasp these rich nuances and, more importantly, integrate them flexibly into your own thinking patterns, you really must actively adapt and diversify your consumption of media and input. Don't just watch generic English media. Specifically, seek out variant-specific films, news programs, contemporary literature, popular music, and social media content originating from these different regions: America, Britain, Australia, India, Canada, South Africa, and so on. As you consume this diverse input, consciously try to attune your internal dialogue to these different perspectives. Notice how ideas are expressed, what communication styles are valued, what cultural assumptions might be underlying the conversation, how humor works differently. This practice not only significantly broadens your mental dexterity and cognitive flexibility in English, but it also deepens your understanding and appreciation of English as a truly global, dynamic, and multifaceted language. It prepares you much better for navigating any English-speaking context you might encounter in our interconnected world. Hashtag outro.
What an absolutely incredible journey we've taken today. We've navigated the complex terrain of how English is processed in the native mind, right from understanding and overcoming linguistic interference to the importance of building deep emotional anchors and boosting that crucial confidence. We've explored so many practical daily habits, from cultivating a persistent internal monologue and internalizing idioms through stories, to engaging in solo mental debates and reading actively for synthesis. And we even uncovered some really ingenious tricks to accelerate progress, like shadowing with variation, using creative constraints in role-playing, and leveraging gamification. We also identified those common pitfalls: burnout, overthinking grammar, cultural misalignments, and discussed concrete strategies for how you can skillfully sidestep them. And finally, we celebrated the rich, vibrant tapestry of English across its diverse global cultural variants. Embracing this goal of native-like thinking in English truly represents a profound shift, doesn't it? It's really moving beyond just being a skilled learner to becoming an intuitive, integrated user of the language. It's a fascinating journey of psychological evolution, dedicated habitual refinement, and deep cultural immersion that can genuinely change how you interact with the world around you.
Indeed, it really is about making English not merely a skill you possess externally, but an intrinsic default part of your internal cognition, how you process reality. With these insights we've discussed, these practical tips, the ingenious tricks, and the strategies to anticipate and overcome those common pitfalls, your mind will increasingly, almost automatically, default to English in more and more situations. And that can enrich every facet of your life. Personal connections, professional opportunities, intellectual exploration, everything. Just remember, persistence really does pay off in this journey. Start small, build steadily day by day, and make sure to acknowledge and celebrate every single step of your progress, no matter how small it seems. This isn't just about learning English vocabulary or grammar. It's about fundamentally transforming your mental landscape.
So thinking about that transformation, what new horizons does this opened up mental space, this place where English truly feels like your mental home turf, potentially unlock for you, our listener, personally or professionally? Perhaps it's new career opportunities requiring seamless communication, richer and more authentic travel experiences, or maybe simply a deeper, more nuanced connection to global literature, film, and ideas. We really hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas for you and given you a powerful, actionable toolkit to achieve that ultimate level of fluency where thinking in English feels effortless. If you found this deep dive valuable and insightful, please do remember to like this video, share it with others who might benefit, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab YouTube channel for more essential insights into mastering the English language. Thank you so much for joining us today.